Why are some animals social while others live solitary lives? And what can animal behavior reveal about the roots of our own social structures? Join us as we dive into the fascinating world of social life in reptile with Professor Martin Whiting from Macquarie University. A leading expert in animal behavior, Martin explores how the social life of reptiles provide a unique window into the past and help us understand the early evolution of family living.
Basically comes down to the fitness benefits of living in a group or a society. So one of the big benefits is cooperation. So there might be less competition and you can work with other individuals to secure food. So take, for example, large carnivores like lions and African wild dogs. They take down very large, dangerous prey that they wouldn't be able to do by themselves. But ultimately, it comes down to those fitness benefits. So sometimes animals need to cooperate in order to reproduce. So a lot of birds and mammals rely on extended members of the family, particularly in harsh environmental conditions. Sometimes they cooperate for survival reasons. So if we think about meerkats that live in large groups, and when they're foraging, they have individuals that act as sentinels and keep an eye out for predators. So there's some real survival benefits to cooperating. But at the end of the day, it always comes down to reproductive fitness and a set of conditions that favor living in a society or a family. In Australia, we have the Agonia group of lizards, which very commonly lives in family groups. And the advantage of studying these lizards is that they have relatively simple family life. They don't have very high levels of cooperation that you might see in primates and birds and meerkats. So we can ask simple questions like how might family living emerge in the first place? And it seems to be an interaction of social factors and environmental factors. So a lot of them live on these rock outcrops. So you have this patchy habitat. So if you imagine a female that's just given birth to maybe, say, 4 babies, and what are the options for those babies? They can either stick around or they can try and find new habitat. But the problem with venturing out and finding new habitat is it's extremely risky. There are a lot of predators out there, and they're actually also unrelated individuals of your same species that might eat you. So cannibalism is quite rife in lizards. And by staying with your parents, you can reduce that risk of cannibalism almost entirely. Interesting, they don't actually recognize those babies as their own. They don't have that genetic kin recognition, but they learn through association that those are basically their offspring, or they learn tolerance of their offspring. So it's something very simple. It's this interaction between living in a patchy landscape and that risk of cannibalism that sort of makes for a social situation where you start off with tolerance and then it becomes something more complex. I think there are lots of parallels. I mean, ultimately, you could say we're just another animal. And if you think back through history, we started out as hunter gatherers and we lived in these small clans to hunt dangerous prey and then also to go out and forage and to know where all those food sources are, to protect our family group or our extended clan from dangerous predators, for example. And also remember that humans are very slow developing, so there's a high level of parental care that's required over an extended period of time. So, your offspring have got a better chance of survival if you've got help from other family members, which is classic kin selection, I suppose. But there are all sorts of interesting strategies that you see in animals that you also see in humans. And in fact, humans are in many ways more like ants than a lot of other animals. I mean, that sounds pretty crazy, but let me tell you what they've both got in common. They've both got very high levels of cooperative behavior. Ants are known for tending fungus gardens and for agriculture. So there's an animal that actually practices agriculture. They practice warfare. I mean, like humans, they've got this division of labor where you have some individuals that are workers, some individuals that are soldiers, kind of less like us to some degree. Ants will raid other ant colonies and steal food and sort of resources, and they'll take slaves, which is pretty crazy. I mean, it's those are some of the worst behaviors that humans do. So yeah, it's always a tricky one. I think we can learn a lot by thinking about behavior in an evolutionary context, and when you see why, for example, a particular species is monogamous or lives in a complex society, and figure out the factors that drive that, it can help understand our own history. If you talk to animal behaviorists or behavioral ecologists in general, they've all got a slightly different take. I mean, I think we're now living in a very different world than our ancestors lived in. We've got global warming, we've got rapidly growing cities, we're living in very altered landscapes. So the big question is what species will be able to adapt to this changing landscape? What sort of role will behavior play in that? A lot of people in animal behavior are realizing that cognition is something that has been understudied and has a real bearing on fitness for a lot of species. So we're seeing a lot more work on cognition, the evolution of intelligence and brain size, and how that plays a role in animals that are having to adapt to these new landscapes. We've also got much more sophisticated tools, particularly genetic tools. So we've got a better understanding of fields like epigenetics and how gene expression interacts with environmental conditions and social behavior. So we're getting a much better understanding of the mechanisms of behavior, and I think that's going to become a much bigger focus, is using those advanced genetic tools to better understand how behavior emerges and how cooperation might emerge or evolve in different species or societies. One of my biggest highlights was probably meeting David Attenborough when he was filming Life in Cold Blood. So I used to work on a very colorful lizard in South Africa, the Akrabi's flat lizard, and the BBC was keen to include that in their series on reptiles. So David Attenborough came to my old field site for 4 days, and it was just a real pleasure. Spending 4 days with David Attenborough, and having meals with him, hearing all his stories, and he's just a very down to earth person that's very generous and humble, and I think for any scientist that sort of grew up watching all his documentaries, that that has to be the biggest highlight that I've had.